Hello and welcome to the Efficio podcast. My name is Simon Lipscomb and this is number 4 in our series of podcasts looking at the issues for procurement and supply chain that have been thrown up by this present COVID crisis. Today's topic is a very pertinent one, probably sits at the heart of all of this stuff. We're going to talk a little bit about supply chain. So I'm very pleased to be joined by my colleague Ashray, who's one of our experts in this space. So Ashray, thank you for joining us. Perhaps you could introduce yourself briefly.
Hello, Simon. Hello, everyone. I'm Ashray Lavsi. I'm a senior manager here with Efficio. I've been with Efficio for about 3.5 years now. Prior to Efficio, I've had over 10 years of experience in supply chain and procurement consulting across various sectors and industries. At Efficio, I'm also one of the leads for Efficio's supply chain SME community. So happy to be here.
Fantastic. Great to have you. For our listeners, Ashray, that are CPOs and supply chain professionals, what are the key things you're seeing in the market around this topic?
Being in conversation with a few people around the industry, what we've seen is that most of the supply chains across the globe have already been disrupted. The key issues that they're seeing are around labor, materials, and distribution capacity. Depending on the business or the node in the supply chain, they either have too much of it or too little of it, never just right. One thing we know for sure, though, is that the world is not going to be the same when we come out of this pandemic. And what we see is that innovation and advances in supply chain will drive a lot of the new change to the new normal.
Interesting. So if this is now the new normal, do businesses thinking about and how do they prepare themselves for that new normal and perhaps, I guess, the opportunities that might open up?
There's essentially 5 things that I personally think that businesses should start doing. The first one is, I cannot stress enough, is to establish reliable communication channels, both upstream and downstream. Along with the communication channels, there should also be enhanced order signals to prevent stockouts, which is what led to a lot of the stockouts in the supermarkets right now was the lag in the order being placed to the restock. If that time can be reduced, this will enable the businesses to establish what the real customer demand is and mitigate the bullwhip effect. Secondly, many of the organizations that we work with have already established what they call the supply chain command and control centers or nerve centers, to take rapid decisions. Companies should now take this opportunity to shore up existing or set up strong sales and operations planning processes with cross-functional buy-in. They already have the cross-functional groups established as part of the command and control centers. So just keep them as is and change them and adapt them as need be. The third thing that companies need to start doing is to identify critical components and map the second and third tier of where they get the supply from. What this will help them do is help them determine what the pinch points are and get a much better view on the surety of supply. Because if they find out when they do the mapping that somewhere down tier 3 or tier 4, a lot of the tier 2s or tier 1s are using the same supplier, then they know there's a bottleneck there and they need to take care of a certain supplier. The fourth thing that they need to do is to secure logistics capacity. What we see in the business right now, or in the UK in particular, is that there's some parts of the logistics industry which are under tremendous strain, while there's parts of the logistics industry which have excess capacity. But one thing we know for sure is that when we ramp up or come out from this pandemic, there's going to be an enormous strain on overall logistics capacity. The prime example of it is going to be the food supply chain. Because I know for a fact, Simon, that when the pubs open, I'm going to make a run for the pubs and I better be stocked.
Yeah, me too.
The last bit is that what businesses need to start doing is to shift their focus from budget adherence to ensuring supply reliability for critical components. So those are the 5 things that I think the businesses need to start doing now.
Fantastic. Thank you. And then I guess to some extent right now, as we record this, we're very much at it feels like we're in the center of the storm and there's a relentless stream of kind of bad news coming out around this topic. But do you think when we get through this kind of period and out the other side, things will have changed? Will there be positives that come out from this massive disruption that we've all seen?
Oh, absolutely. With each crisis, there is tremendous opportunity. I do see there's going to be a lot of innovation in supply chain because of this. The key one, which a lot of the businesses, to be fair, already do, but there'll be a further adoption of that, is going to be more reliance on forecasting rather than on order signals. Touching back on the point that I made earlier, the time from ordering to restock needs to reduce. And this can be done by a higher reliance on forecasting and holding each nodes of the supply chain account to the forecasting. We don't really need new technology or analytics for it. Everything that needs to happen to enable this already exists. So a lot more companies will start adopting the forecasting rather than relying on ordering signal. The next bit that we see is a more significant number of businesses will now start using modeling and designing their supply chain. So when I was researching this, it came as a surprise to me that less than a quarter of the businesses actually have optimized their supply chain networks to figure out where in the supply chain they need to put distribution centers and what they need to be making out at the multiple manufacturing locations. But what we see now is that this crisis will cause a lot more businesses to adopt the modeling and designing of their supply chain to optimize demand fulfillment. The leaders of that pack will actually even take it a step further and use the modeling and simulation to feed into monthly and quarterly plans. The next thing we see is that a higher number of manufacturers will now adopt additive manufacturing or 3D printing, especially for critical components, because they have already seen the supply chains being disrupted because of the supply of critical components. So if possible, they're going to try and make them using additive manufacturing, which kind of brings me to the next point, which is around vertical integration. Because a lot of manufacturers will now start assessing whether I have identified this critical component, do I just buy that part of my supply chain, whether it be upstream or downstream, to have a better control of my supply chain. Now, a word of caution for companies trying to assess that would be to make sure that you have a parallel source of supply and some additional redundancy built in so that you are not overly leveraged. And the last bit I think that will change will be a further reliance on adding redundancy into the system. So a lot of more manufacturers will now start moving away from a single source of supply as much as possible.
Fantastic, Ashray. Thank you so much. That has been fascinating and I'm sure really helpful, really useful for our listeners. Lots of very practical ideas and tips in there. So thank you. Thank you also to everyone that's listening to this. If you have any questions or comments on the things that we've discussed, please get in touch with either Ashray or myself via LinkedIn or the usual channels. But Ashray, as I say, thank you so much. To people listening, thank you. And our next podcast, looking at our next category, will be coming in due course. Thank you very much.